The Walking Dead audio comic is presented in episodic order. If this is the first episode you're listening to, please go back to episode 1 and listen from there. The following podcast is for mature audiences only. Listener discretion is advised. And this episode of The Walking Dead audio comic is dedicated to the memory of Mary Grasso. Previously on The Walking Dead audio comic. The survivors thought they were safe at Wiltshire Estates, only to learn that they were dead wrong. They realize too late the town is overrun by walkers, and Donna is killed as she and the others scout out the houses in the neighborhood. The rest of the survivors barely escape with their lives, and in their grief and despair search for a different, safer location. Knowing they are running dangerously low on food, they continue to check abandoned stores and cars for any supplies they can find. 1 week had passed since they left the estates, and after setting up a makeshift camp, Rick, Tyrese, and Carl make their way into the woods to hunt for some food. While walking along, Tyrese hears a noise and tells Rick and Carl to be quiet when a shot rips through the air, hitting Carl. A stranger comes out of the woods and Rick pounces on him, threatening to kill him for what he's done. And now, issue 10 of The Walking Dead audio comic. Tyrese ran as fast as he could towards Rick, screaming, "Rick, stop! Don't do it!" He hoped that Rick had heard him, and that he wouldn't kill the stranger who had just shot Carl. "You're still breathing, Rick! Carl's not dead!" Rick turned to look at Tyrese, the anger and hatred still on his face as he held tight to the man who had just shot his son, his gun still in the man's mouth. "He's alive? He's alive?" Rick questioned Tyrese as he let go of the stranger who fell to the ground with a thud. The two men rushed over to Carl, who lay on the ground unconscious, blood pouring from the bullet wound, turning the white snow underneath him a bright crimson. "He's breathing? He's alive?" Rick again questioned, this time to no one in particular. "What do we do? What the hell do we do? What the hell do we do?" Tyrese looked down at Carl and then over at Rick. "He's breathing, but he's unconscious. He's lost a lot of blood. We've got to do something to stop the bleeding. There's got to be something we can do." The two men stood up and, still looking down at Carl, Rick said, "Yeah, we've got to stop the bleeding. The first aid kit at the RV. We need to get him back to the RV." From behind Rick, the stranger that had shot Carl approached cautiously, pointing back through the trees. At the farm I live on, the guy that owns the place had his son shot in the foot," the man said as Rick turned to him with a still angry look on his face. "He got the bullet out. Patched him up good. He works on animals around the farm." The pain and anger quickly left Rick's face as the stranger talked. "Think he could help my son?" Rick asked the man. "He ain't no doctor, but I think he'll know what to do," the man replied. "The place ain't a mile away. We'd be there right quick." Rick looked over at the man, and as he pulled his jacket off, he replied, "Less than a mile? I can do that. Tyrese, get ready to help me roll him over onto my coat." Rick laid his coat down on the ground as Tyrese got down on his knees next to Carl. "Okay, slowly," Rick said as the two men moved Carl into the jacket. "I'm going to this farm. You go back to the RV and tell everyone what happened. It's less than a mile from here. You guys should be able to find it pretty easily, Rick said to Tyrese as he picked up Carl from the ground and looked down at him. Is it pretty easy to find? He asked the man who had a panicked look on his face. You can see it from the road. If y'all park just up yonder, you gotta be on 64. You'll snake around the road and it'll be on your left. It's a little further away by road, but you'll find it easy. Come on, let's go, the man said as he turned and started off towards the farm. Lead the way. I'll be right behind you, Rick said as he turned to look at Tyrese. Tyrese, tell Lori there's nothing to worry about. Tyrese looked back at Rick and replied, Okay. As fast as they could move, Rick, Carl, and the stranger made their way through the woods towards an unknown farm. While in the opposite direction, as fast as he could move, Tyrese ran back to the RV and the other survivors. As he reached the group, he burst out of the woods, surprising everyone. Tyrese! Lori yelled out in shock at seeing the huge man rush through the trees. As she calmed down, she continued, We heard the shot. Did you guys get something? Is everything Where are they? Suddenly a sense of dread overtook Lori. What happened? Where are they? Tyrese ran straight to Lori and explained the situation to her. Some guy thought we were zombies. He shot at us. Carl was hit, but he's okay. Rick and this guy are taking Carl back to some farm so another guy can help him. He's okay, though. They're going to... Panicked, Lori grabbed Tyrese by the shoulders and said, Where? Where are they? Where? It's up the road from here. I know the way. Let's go, Tyrese said as he made his way towards the RV, the others close behind him. Just outside of the woods, Rick and the stranger raced across a field where at one time crops had grown, towards a large fenced-in farmhouse. Just a stone's throw away was a large barn. As the two men got inside the fence line, the stranger called out to a young dark-haired girl who was wearing a heavy flannel shirt. Where's your pa? With a concerned look on her face at a stranger rushing into her yard, the young girl answered back, He's at the house. What's going on, Otis? Who is that? Ain't no time right now, Otis yelled out, turning away from the girl as he took off again towards the house. Hearing the commotion from inside, an older man with gray slick-back hair and a beard no more than a few days old opened the door to the house and called out, What happened? Who's this? What's going on? Otis clambered up the front steps towards the man, pointed back towards Rick and Carl, who were just behind him, and excitedly replied, Boy's been shot. We need you to give him a look. The man held the door open as Rick raced past him. Let's get him inside. Where has he been shot? How bad is it? The man asked as he pointed inside the house, showing Rick where to go. As Rick laid Carl down, Otis and the older man rushed over to take a look at him, while Rick, his shirt covered in Carl's blood, stepped back to the wall, dazed. Help me get this shirt off him, Otis. I've got to pull this bullet out, the older man said as he started to check over Carl. Run that over the fire to sterilize it, and hand me that bottle of alcohol. Okay, I think I've got it. Hold him down! As the two men continued to work on Carl, Rick heard something from outside and made his way towards the front door. The RV had pulled up to the farm, and the group of survivors, with Lori leading the way, raced towards the house. Rick! Lori screamed out just as he stepped out onto the front porch of the house. Where is he? Where's Carl? Is he okay? Not slowing down, Lori ran full speed into her husband and grabbed him. Rick looked down at her, surprised. This guy's working on him. He seems to know what he's doing. I think he stopped the bleeding, at least. Tears streamed from Lori's eyes as she looked at her husband. Oh, Rick, what are we gonna do? Rick grabbed her hand and held it as he replied, I don't know, Lori. I just don't know. Glenn, who had been watching the couple the entire time, turned his attention towards the front entranceway as the gray-haired gentleman walked towards Rick and Lori. I've got him patched up. I pulled the bullet out of him, and I stopped the bleeding. He was real lucky. The bullet lodged in his shoulder blade. Must have come in at exactly the right angle, the man said as he wiped blood from his hands onto a small rag. Had the bullet been a little more determined, it could have gone right into his lung. Had that happened, I wouldn't have been able to do a whole lot of anything for him. He's still out, but I think he'll be okay. All we can do at this point is just wait and see. Rick approached the man, placed one hand on his shoulder, and took the other one and shook it. Thanks, mister. The man looked back at Rick and interrupted him. Name's Herschel Green. Don't thank me just yet. Your time would be better put to use praying for the boy. I ain't had a prayer answered in a good solid few months, so I figure we're about due for something good. As the rest of the group made their way towards the house, Herschel invited them all inside. I'm Herschel. This is my farm, Herschel said as the group of survivors gathered around him and his family. You guys are welcome to stay here while the boy gets better. We got plenty of food harvested because, well, the market's closed and really plenty of room. So you're all welcome to stay here for the time being. Now, let me introduce you to the folks living here. Herschel began to point his finger towards each of the people who were a part of his family, starting with a slightly larger young female with long dark hair. This is Lacey, my eldest daughter. Next, he pointed towards a man in his mid-20s with slick back hair, a ponytail, and a few days' stubble. The one with the chip on his shoulder is my son Arnold. He next pointed towards the young girl who was outside when Rick and Otis approached. My daughter Maggie's the one holding that chair down. My youngest son Billy, Herschel said as he pointed to a dark-haired boy wearing a headband. And then finally he pointed towards two young dark-haired girls, one with pigtails, the other wearing glasses, wore her hair down like her sister's. Rachel and Susie here round out the pack. Susie's the one with the pigtails. Herschel then turned to Otis and a curly-haired, middle-aged blonde woman who stood beside him. This is Otis and his girlfriend Patricia. They live up the road from here. Our place is safer than their place, so they're staying with us until this whole thing blows over. That's about it for us here, aside from some critters running around outside. Herschel looked over at his oldest daughter and said, Lacey, could you take them out and show them around the farm? Let them get acquainted with the place? I want to check in on the boy, make sure everything's okay. Without turning around, Lacey rolled her eyes and replied, Sure, whatever. This is our yard. If you'll follow me around back, I'll show you our backyard, Lacey said as she led the group outside. Alan stopped suddenly at the front stoop and called out, Billy Ben and I are going to sit this one out. I'm just not up to it. Andrea spun herself around with a look of disdain on her face and said, They can still come. I'll keep an eye on them, Alan. I'm sure they'll want to see the cows. The boys jumped up and ran down the stairs as Billy called out, Yeah, I want to see cows. Alan leaned up against a post and replied weakly, That's fine. Go with Andrea, boys. Andrea looked back up at Alan and her expression changed to one of sorrow as the boys rushed past her. Back inside, in one of the bedrooms, Carl lay fast asleep in one of the beds, a bandage over his shoulder where the bullet had been. Rick and Laurie sat near a window just watching over their son. He looks so peaceful, so content. I hope he's having wonderful dreams and enjoying his break from all the madness going on out here, Laurie said. If only he could sleep till all this was over, Rick replied. Laurie turned to Rick and in a low and angry voice said, Jesus, Rick, we don't want him to be in a coma. What a terrible thing to say. Rick looked back at Laurie upset and replied, That's not what I meant. Damn it! I just wish that he didn't have to go through all this shit with us. Is that so wrong? Oh God, Laurie, I'm so damn worried about him. Rick grabbed his wife and gave her a big hug. As he held her, he grabbed her face gently and looked deep into her eyes. I love you, Laurie. I don't know if I say it enough with all that's going on. I really love you. I've always loved you. I don't know how I'd get through any of this without you. Laurie laid her head down on Rick's shoulder as tears started to come to her eyes. I love you too. I love you so much. Outside, just behind the barn, Otis sat on a tree stump by an axe that was buried in another stump. He looked down at the ground, obviously upset by the events of the day. From behind him, Tyrese approached. Otis, right? Otis looked half-heartedly back at Tyrese and replied softly, Yeah. I don't know if you caught it before. I'm Tyrese. You doing okay? Otis turned his head completely around to face Tyrese and replied, I wouldn't hurt a fly. I mean, I was out there hunting, but I wouldn't kill no animal I wasn't going to eat. I'm real gentle. I ain't violent at all, and I shot that kid. I understand why that Rick fella wanted to kill me. If I had killed his boy, I'd have wanted him to do it. I deserved it. We still don't know if he's going to live. Tyrese looked down at the ground just past Otis as Otis turned his head back around and looked down as well. I ain't saying what you did was right, but you can't worry yourself to death over it. What's done is done. I'm worried sick about Carl, but there's nothing you or I can do about it now. Rick's been under a lot of stress. We all have. We just barely made it out of some neighborhood that was crawling with those zombies. Our friend lost his wife there. Then not a week later, his son is shot. He snapped. Otis lifted his head back up and replied, Neighborhood? They must have been Wilshire Estates. Patricia and I were there when this all started. Everyone in this area couldn't make it to Atlanta decided to hole up there. It was a disaster. We didn't have no protection. Once them things come in, we had no way of stopping them. Patricia and I barely made it out alive. We didn't have the National Guard protecting us like they do in Atlanta. Actually, from what everyone is saying, Atlanta is worse off, Tyrese said as he looked over at Otis. Otis looked up at Tyrese and replied, Really? Patricia and I were going to try and make it there when summer came. We figured it'd be safer there. Damn. Alan looked on as his two sons took turns throwing snowballs at each other, laughing and having fun by a horse pen. Slowly from behind, Andrea approached and called out, Hey kids, go play with your Aunt Carol and Sophia. Your daddy and I need to talk. The twins stopped what they were doing and turned to look over at Andrea. Kay, Billy called back to her. As the two boys ran over to Carol and Sophia, Andrea stepped up right behind Alan and said, Alan, we need to talk. Alan craned his neck back slightly to see who was talking to him.
Huh? What do you want?
Andrea replied, I want you to think about your kids. You've got to be strong for them. I know you're upset, you have every right to be, but those boys need you. You can't just shut down like this. Alan turned his head more to face Andrea, a tear coming to his eye.
What? What the hell are you telling me? Get over it? Stop being sad? You want to throw quit being a pussy in there and go for the home run? I just lost my fucking wife, you little cunt. What the hell you get off telling me anything about my grievous process? Fuck you!
Andrea, surprised by Alan's response, yelled at him as he turned his head back away from her. What? I don't know what it's like to lose someone? I just lost my fucking sister. I think I know a little bit about the grieving process. I know exactly what you're going through. I shut down when I lost Amy. I didn't speak for days. I couldn't think. I almost lost my mind. You don't have that luxury. Ben and Billy need their father right now. I was just trying to help you, asshole.
My wife just died!
Alan yelled louder, not wanting to hear a word Andrea had to say. Andrea threw her hands up in the air as she too got even louder. And my sister died, and Shane died, and Jim died. My parents are probably dead. Everyone I've ever known are probably dead. My friends, my family, my neighbors, my coworkers, everyone. Everyone in the group is dealing with that. We're surrounded by death. It's taken over our lives. There isn't a goddamn thing we can do about it. We either deal with it or we don't, and right now your sons need you to deal with it and get over it. They need you. Think about them. Not even bothering to turn around, Alan replied,
All I can do is think about them. It's all I've ever done for days. I think about them growing up without their mother. I think about them getting older, forgetting about her, not even remembering her face. I'm thinking about that, and it's tearing me apart, you little bitch. Don't try and come over here and give me advice. You don't know shit. You're not helping one bit. Leave me the fuck alone.
Andrea closed her eyes and shook her head a moment before turning and walking away, leaving Alan to his grief. Rick and Laurie sat sleeping against each other by the window in the room where Carl was, when Herschel approached Rick and whispered in his ear, Your son is awake. Oh, thank God, Laurie said as the two sprang from the floor, made a run for the bed. Where's my hat? Carl asked as his mother and father reached the bed, giant smiles across both of their faces. Oh, son, I'm so glad you're awake, Rick said as both he and Laurie reached in and hugged Carl. How are you feeling, Carl? Does it still hurt? Rick asked him. My shoulder does. Bad, Carl replied. Don't worry, son. You're going to be okay, Laurie told him as Carl turned to look at her. A smile crossed his face as he said, Nobody better have taken my hat. Just then, Tyrese came walking into the room holding onto Carl's hat, as Herschel left to let everyone have some time with him. Don't worry, kiddo. I was keeping it warm for you. Thanks, Tyrese, Carl said as he sat up in the bed and accepted the hat. Don't mention it. I'm just glad to see that you're okay, Tyrese replied as he tousled Carl's hair. I gotta say, Rick, Otis is really torn up about this guy. If you could just... he seems like such a nice guy. Rick turned to look at Tyrese indifferently as Carl put his hat on. What am I supposed to say? It's okay he shot my son? It's not okay. I can't just let it go. What he did was damn irresponsible. If he's that careless, he shouldn't be roaming around the woods with a gun in the first place. Tyrese looked at Rick and tried to state his case. I just don't see the harm in... Carl's face turned white and his mouth dropped open as he interrupted what Tyrese was saying. Somebody shot me? Who shot me? Laurie and Rick turned to look at Carl, their mouths hanging open now. Oh, son, I'm sorry. In the woods, a man named Otis, he accidentally shot you, Rick said. Laurie then said, But don't worry, honey. Everything's going to be okay now. You're going to be fine. Otis helped me take you here, and his friend Herschel patched you up. We're going to be staying here while you rest. You've got a lot of new people to meet, son. Carl replied, Cool. I like meeting new people. Laurie put her hand down on Rick's shoulder as a smile crossed his face. Through the door, Carol and Sophia emerged. You mind a little company? Sophia wants to see Carl, Carol said as the two entered the room. Tyrese looked over at Carol as a smile crossed both Rick and Carl's face. Come on in. Laurie and I are about to get something to eat. I'm sure we'd love the company, Rick said as Sophia ran over to the bed Carl was in and jumped on. Be good, Carl. Get some rest after Sophia and Carol leave, Laurie said as she and Rick turned and left the room. Tyrese made his way over to Carol and put his arm around her as Sophia and Carl laughed and talked. Look at them, Carol said as she smiled at the kids. They look so cute together. Let's let them talk, Tyrese replied as he and Carol walked out of the room. Did it hurt? Sophia asked Carl as she looked at his bandaged shoulder. I don't know. I don't remember. I think so. I bet I'm going to have a big scar, Carl replied as he too looked down at his bandaged arm. Cool. Scars are sexy, Sophia said as a smile crossed her face. Sexy?
You don't even know what that means, Carl replied, shaking his head. Neither do you, Sophia snapped back. So, I'm not the one that tried to say it, Carl said jokingly. Sophia's voice lowered as she closed her eyes and put her head down. It's the grown-up word for pretty, I think. Carl just looked there and replied, Well, scars aren't pretty. I'm glad you're okay, Sophia said softly, and then lunged towards Carl and gave him a big kiss on the cheek. Ew, gross, Carl said as he stuck his tongue out in disgust and quickly wiped his cheek off with his hand while Sophia looked at him, smiling. Outside, Laurie was watching some chickens wander here and there, thinking to herself when Dale approached her.
Laurie?
Dale asked. What can I do for you, Dale? Laurie replied without turning around.
I'm going to talk, and you're going to listen. I'm an old man, too old for arguments. So I want you to know that I really don't want this to become one. I'm going to say what I have to say, and then we're done,
Dale started as he got closer to Laurie. Laurie turned her head back to look at Dale as he continued.
Rick is the backbone of this group. He's the one stable thing we've all got. He knows this. That's why, when he's scared, you can't tell. You know he's scared, but he ain't showing it. We need that. We need him. I don't know what you did with Shane. I don't want to know what you did to put ideas in his head. But if that baby's his, and not Rick's, I'm begging you, take it to your grave. It'll kill him. It'll be the one last thing to make him crack, and we don't need that. I'm not accusing you of shit, so don't try to defend yourself. I just wanted to say my piece, and I appreciate you sitting through it.
Dale turned around and started to walk towards the house.
I think they're done with dinner. Let's go eat.
Laurie stood alone for a few minutes, watching Dale walk away, as she took in everything Dale had just said to her, and then made her way towards the house slowly. Inside the house, the whole group, including Herschel's family and friends, gathered inside a dining area where a huge table was set up with plenty of food on it. Everyone sat down, laughed, and talked, while enjoying a little sense of normalcy for once. I'm impressed, Herschel, I've got to say. You've really got quite the setup here, Rick said as he looked over at Herschel, who was sitting to his right at the head of the table. Laurie looked down at her empty plate and started to get up from the table. I'm going to take Carl a plate before the food's all gone. Rick turned his attention down the other side of the table towards Tyrese, who was sitting next to Carol and Sophia. I think I know how you felt when you first ran into us with all our canned goods, Tyrese. Tyrese smiled and replied,
Gotta say, pal, this guy's got me a little bit more impressed. At this rate, I think the next guy I run into is going to have a 4-star restaurant set up in his mansion.
As Tyrese talked, from down the table a few seats, Glenn stared at him and Carol. Across from him, Maggie, Herschel's daughter, watched Glenn as he silently kept watch on those two, with longing in his eyes. After dinner was over, Glenn made his way out to the front porch to think things over. As he sat looking around, Maggie opened the door. Glenn, right? So, why are you staring at that black guy's girlfriend all the time? You didn't take your eyes off her all through dinner, Maggie asked. Glenn, surprised at the question, replied, Huh? Maggie made her way over to the bench that Glenn was on and sat down next to him. I saw you looking at her. What's up with that? Glenn replied, Before Tyrese came, I guess I had my eye on Carol. She's a bit older than me, but I liked her. I guess I'm just a little pissed I never made my move. Maggie turned to look at Glenn. Yeah, I guess she's pretty. Glenn turned his head to look back at Maggie. It's not even that. I mean, she is pretty, but I don't know. Everyone around me is pairing off. There's just not that many women to go around. On top of all that's going on around me, I just don't want to end up alone too. I mean, I want to have sex at least a couple more times before I die. Jesus. I don't even know you. I'm sorry. I don't mean to spill my guts like this. Maggie thought for a second at what Glenn had said, and then replied, I'll fuck you. If that's what you're after, I'll fuck you. Glenn was taken aback by what Maggie had to say as his mouth dropped open and his eyes widened. What? Maggie turned her head away from Glenn and stared down the dirt path that led away from the house. My boyfriend's gone, probably dead. To be honest, he was a bit of a jerk anyway. You're the first guy I've seen in months that's not related to me or that Otis idiot. It's like you said, our choices aren't very broad. We've got to be proactive, or we're going to end up alone. Maggie turned back to look at Glenn for his response. That does make sense, Glenn replied. So let's fuck then. You want to do that? Maggie asked. A big smile crossed Glenn's face as he replied, Yeah, sure. Maggie grabbed Glenn's hand as they made their way off the porch, passing by Tyrese, who was headed to the side of the house where Chris and Julie were standing holding each other.
Okay, guys, we need to talk,
Tyrese said with a little anger in his voice as he approached the two. Dad! Julie cried out, startled, as they both looked at Tyrese approach. Tyrese raised his finger and pointed at the two.
Don't dad me, young lady.
This isn't going on right under my nose. I just don't have time to put up with this. I don't want to have to worry about you two fooling around all the time. I don't want to have to keep an eye on you on top of all the other shit I've got to do. You want to get pregnant? Do you not see how dangerous that would be? I don't know how Rick and Laura are dealing with it the way they are. This isn't a game. I know you two think you're in love, but you're young. Think about what you're doing.
Tyrese turned and started to walk away, but finished his thought.
Just keep your hands to yourself.
Julie and Chris watched as Tyrese walked away angrily. Chris then turned to Julie and said, "See? I told you we needed to go ahead and do it. I want to be together with you for the rest of eternity. I don't want your father to stand in the way of that." Julie kept watching her father walk as she replied, "I know. I just don't want to do it until the time is right. We have to wait." Chris's face turned angry as he replied, "Fine, Julie. We'll play it your way, but I don't want to wait forever." Rick and Herschel hung out over by the horse pen, leaning on the fence, watching as the horses grazed and galloped about. As he watched, Herschel said,
"My dad owned this place. I grew up on this farm, but I never liked it. I wanted to be a veterinarian, so that's what I did. Working on creatures great and small was my calling, and I did it for years. After my wife died, my practice fell apart. She always held up the business end. All I did was work on the animals."
Herschel turned to look at Rick and continued,
"I couldn't do much of anything without her."
Rick turned and looked back at Herschel. "Sorry to hear about that. How long ago was it?"
Herschel replied, "She passed on almost 6 years ago. It was my father's dying wish that I would come back and work on the farm. It just seemed like the right thing to do. I've been at it for 5 years now. It's honest work. I could see why my dad loved it so much. There's nothing quite like living off the land, providing for yourself, knowing exactly where every piece of food you eat comes from. It's certainly come in handy in a light of current events."
"That's for sure. Seems like you got a nice stable set up here," Rick said as he watched one of the horses gallop by.
"You're welcome to enjoy it while Carl heals. I'd recommend staying here in that time. It won't be good for him to be out in the elements again, at least not right away. We don't have much room in the house. You'll still have to sleep in your RV, but we've got plenty of food, and during the day you won't have to worry about being safe."
Herschel said as he took his foot off the fence and got ready to go back inside. Rick turned to him before he left and asked, "What about your barn? You think we can move into that place? Most of us are pretty sick of cramming into that RV." A look of dread overtook Herschel as he leaned forward on the fence again and stared straight ahead.
"The barn? You don't want to go in there, trust me. That's where we keep all our dead ones."
This podcast is not endorsed by Skybound, Image Comics, or Robert Kirkman. It is intended for entertainment purposes only. The Walking Dead, all characters, names of characters, or other Walking Dead related items are registered trademarks and or copyrights of Skybound LLC and the respective trademark and copyright holders. The official Walking Dead site can be found at www.thewalkingdead.com. Songs: The Descent, Steel and Seething, Metaphysic, and Undaunted by Kevin MacLeod. The main title theme by Gene Grasso. The Walking Dead audio comic is narrated and performed by Gene Grasso. And all original content of this podcast is the intellectual property of Gene Grasso unless otherwise indicated.